switching. No, the stream hasn't started yet. They're gonna come up soon. Basically, they're a bit late. I was told that the stream will be there. Will start about not the stream, but the town hall. It will start in about quarter to 7. So, well, thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you're doing fantastic today. Streaming in Cold Lake with a Starlink dish, which is outside the door that's in the back, which is kind of cool to see. So I'm currently in Cold Lake, and that's going to be very interesting to see. Oh, FYI, tomorrow at 7 p.m. I will have an interview with Nat and the Guy at 7 p.m. tomorrow, and at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, I'm going to have John Bolton on my show. It's going to be fantastic today. So that's what I have on the plate today. They're going to get started soon, and Chris is over there down on my left side. Can't see it, but I see it. And people start to line it up. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you in a bit. I don't talk too much today. I think I'm tired, I guess. I don't know. Alrighty. I only have 22 people watching, but it's gonna increase a little bit here. I'm just going to see on your chats where you guys are watching from, and don't forget the super chats and the e-transfers helps things a lot, especially in those times where the federal government is amusing themselves and screwing us over, which is what they do, I think. So let's see. Yeah, the room's filling up. Not too many faces, but it's definitely filling up. People are coming from their work, so they're just going to come here and, well, you know. So curious to see, how is it that Cold Lake is so hard on Alberta independence? I'm just watching my comments here. Interesting way of looking at things. So far, the people I met here are mostly in favor or not, but I think that's going to be just Cold Lake in general, not necessarily where I am right now. That's my guesstimate, I guess, but see what happens.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I'll be your first speaker, but I'm also your MC. My name is Sheane Meikle. First things first, the bathrooms are to the south of the building, and the emergency exits are at the back and to the sides. I would ask that you turn your cell phones off, or not off, but silent, because it's very distracting, and I'm usually the biggest culprit of that, so, but I did make sure I turned mine to silent. There will be questions and answers at the end. Please save your questions till we get to the question and answer period. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical relationship between Ottawa and what is now the province of Alberta. From 1880 to 1903, 1904, there was a huge settler movement from the United States up here. And this worried Ottawa. How many people here have heard of the little spot on the map called USONA? You don't count, Max. There's one there. I actually live 6 miles from USONA. And during the 1880s to now, do you know what USONA stands for? The United States of North America. How many people here know the town of Rimbey? Okay, there, a lot more. The original name was Kansas Ridge. The city of Airdrie, its original name was Yankee Valley. I live about halfway between USONA and another community. All over Alberta and Saskatchewan, there were towns popping up in communities that either still had American names and they've changed them out. Province. So that is one of the big factors in why Saskatchewan and Alberta were formed out of the Northwest Territories. In 1903, made the following quote: "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people to the east, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way to our prosperity." Now, why is it significant that I mentioned Sir Clifford Sifton? Well, the big reason is he was one of the main architects of the Alberta and Saskatchewan Acts. So in 1905, on September 1st, the Alberta Act and the Saskatchewan Act came into being, forming two provinces out of the Northwest Territories. Now, at the time when they came out with the Alberta Act, how many here have actually read the Alberta Act? I would encourage you to go to the Government of Alberta's website and download a copy. It's not very long, but it will give you a totally different perspective on how we started. And one of the big things was that they gave us the name of a province, but they gave us the rights at that time of the same as the territories. We did not get full provincial rights. In fact, our first two premiers were appointed by Ottawa, not elected by the people. So I would encourage you to go read the Alberta Act and see how we've had to fight ever since to get back the rights, or to get the rights that are afforded to every other province. Alberta and Saskatchewan are the only two provinces that were brought into Confederation by an act of legislation rather than by negotiation. Every other province negotiated their way into Confederation. In 1913, the federal government came up with the Railroad Act amendments. Now, what did this do? This took and made it so that regional railroads could not cross provincial lines. And so what did that mean? So that meant let's say I loaded grain in Stettler, and I was shipping it to Thunder Bay. Border, I would have to switch, but I'd not just switch engines. They'd have to unload the grain and load it onto the other carriers' cars. So you'd have to do that at Saskatchewan, and then again in Ontario. And this made it very difficult for regional railways to survive. And by 1939, the majority of them had shut it up. The largest one being Alberta Central Railway. Alberta Northern Railway, which ran in this area, it survived in name until 1972. But they were purchased in the 50s by CN Rail. And that in 1943, a new company was formed, CN, and they bought up all the assets of the regional railway. But interestingly enough, the Railway Act amendments was given an exemption in the East. So it only applied to Western railways. In 1930, the National Natural Resources Transfer Agreement was passed, and that gave the provinces control over their natural resources. However, at the time, the federal government made it very clear that this did not apply to Alberta and Saskatchewan. So even though by law it did, they made it very clear that they weren't going to hold us to the same standard as the other provinces. In 1931, on December 11th, the Statute of Westminster was decreed by the King. Now, what did that do? Because there's a lot of misconception about the Statute of Westminster, but the one thing that it did do is give sovereignty over land and resources to the people in care of the provinces, not in care of Ottawa, in care of the provinces. I'm going to pull this up because it's slowly sagging. Now, that means that there is not a drop of federal land in this province. If we were to enforce the Statute of Westminster, we would never had things like Jasper happen. National parks do not exist. They are owned by the province, and we need to enforce that. We were given all the land within our borders by the Crown in 1931. In 1935, the Canada Wheat Board was formed, and it was voluntary. Ship it to the States. You would pull up to your grain bin, load your load of grain, and turn around and drive to the States and sell it. If you lived in Winnipeg or Saskatoon area or Cold Lake area, you want to sell your grain, you would pull up to the elevator, or you'd pull up to your grain bin, load your grain into your truck, you would pull over to the elevator, offload it on the one side, go around to the other side of the elevator, buy it back from the Canada Wheat Board for, they would make a profit on it, and then you could take and ship it to the States. Now, this ended in 2012, and the reason that it ended is finally Western Canadian farmers had had enough, and they stood up, and 13 Saskatchewan and Alberta farmers in particular decided that it was worth going to jail for. And they ran the border with their grain, and they spent from 6 months to a year in jail each. And finally, it was repealed in 2012. 7 to 1950, federal control that our oil pricing, and they told us when we could put pipe in the ground to get it from point A to point B. It lasted for 3 years before it was finally repealed. How many in this room are old enough to remember the great flag debate of 1965? Got a few in the room. Now, I started school in the early 70s, and by that time it had already been memory hold. What happened was that Lester B. Pearson, then Prime Minister of Canada, decided that he wanted a new flag for Canada. And he decided that he wanted it to be the sugar maple leaf. Diefenbaker stood up in the House of Commons and said that it needed to be the Manitoba maple or box elder, which was found from coast to coast, since the sugar maple is only found in eastern Canada, not in western Canada. Pearson did not like this, so he forced closure on the bill and forced it to vote. And not a single Western Canadian MP voted for the maple leaf flag. And there was so much contention around it that in 1967, when Canada celebrated its centennial, many towns and cities in Western Canada refused to fly the maple leaf. They flew the red ensign, which is still an official flag of Canada. They would not fly the maple leaf. But by the early 1970s, only a few years later, nobody remembered it. And I think it had something to do with a hockey game in '72 between Canada and Russia, and they used that as a way to jam that flag down Western Canadians' throats. From 1973 to 1974, there was the oil export taxation policies, and Alberta's oil profits were capped. This meant that you probably heard that in the 70s we had an energy shortage. Well, no, we didn't have an energy shortage. If you were an oil company and if you surpassed your quota, you had to send all your profits to Ottawa. Would you even bother pulling it out of the ground? And that's what happened. And that lasted for 18 months. And finally, under our then Premier, my brain just evaporated. Our Premier at the time fought against it and was able to get him to repeal it after 18 months. And that was a big thing. But they weren't done with it. Because in 1980, the National Energy Program was brought in. Now, the National Energy Program brought everything that was in that previous bills back into play, but it added to it that we now had to sell to the East at their desired price. We could not set the price that we sold to Eastern Canada, and we had to give them priority on our oil. And this stayed in effect until 1988. Then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney turned around and repealed it in 1988. But he didn't repeal it because he was so magnanimous towards the West and Alberta. He repealed it because oil prices had dropped so low that it cost more to maintain the program than they were getting out of it. So anybody that tells you that it matters whether it's a liberal government or a conservative government, it doesn't. Alberta doesn't matter to them. In the 1980s and 90s, we had several significant things happen. We had the 1982 Constitution Act, which brought home the Constitution to Canada. 1985, we had the first Quebec referendum. In 1995, we had the second referendum. Now, the second referendum brought us a little-known thing called the Clarity Act. And that is something that we can thank Quebec for, is it gave with a list of steps that they would have to take that a province would have to take in order to leave Confederation. And the federal government put those into law under the Clarity Act. And that is Act. And it gave Ottawa complete control over Alberta's projects. So this meant that it didn't matter if we wanted to put in a highway, a skyscraper, a pipeline, major projects required federal approval in order to as we all know, really hurt our oil patch. And we haven't recovered yet from it entirely. In 2019, Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Act, and Bill 8, the Tanker Ban Act were brought in. Now what they did is they controlled where we could put a pipeline in, how we could put it in. We had to get even more federal control over it because we're bringing in environmental and blah, blah, blah to bring it into effect. And then we would no longer allowed to ship it off the West Coast, ship our oil off the West Coast. Now, these four, last fall, Premier Smith signed an MOU with the Prime Minister that would have got rid of these four things. But within a week of that MOU being signed, Parliament met and the House of Commons voted to defeat that. So that MOU is still is null and void, and all of these are still in effect. Now let's move to the modern day. You've got two bills that are in the House right now. One of them is on its first reading in the House, and the other one is on its first reading in the Senate. Bill C-9, which is the one that's on its first reading in the Senate, has already passed the House of Commons. And what that bill is it's the anti-hatred bill. And what that says is that if somebody complains against you or me, against a meeting like this, we can be charged, we can be thrown in jail, and we can lose all of our assets. Now, the one that is in the first reading, Bill C-8, and that's the online hate bill, the online censorship bill. That one's, when put into conjunction with Bill C-9, is even more erroneous, because what that does is they can wipe you off the internet with the stroke of the minister's pen. And I don't mean that they'll get rid of your ISP. They will get rid of your presence on the internet. And if you try and make a fake profile to get around it, and they find out, you can go to jail for it. And that, like I said, takes only the stroke of a pen of the minister. There is no recourse for you. You have no appeal process. There is nothing that you can do. If they do it, you are done. And how many people here could survive without some access to the internet? And in case you're thinking, how many of you use your ATM machine? That's via the internet. You will be wiped your presence off the internet. So that includes ATMs. That includes anything of that nature. You will have no access. Now, these two bills, if I took the rest of the history out, just these last two bills are reason, in my opinion, that we need to seek sovereignty for the Alberta. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is going to be Mr. Leighton Grey. And Leighton is a and he's a very knowledgeable guy, I'll tell you that, because I've heard him speak many times, and I learn something new every time I hear him speak. So without further ado, here's Mr. Leighton Grey.
Good evening. It's great to see you all here. I know it's a beautiful spring night. It's been a long winter. Those of us who are residents of Cold Lake know it's been a long winter. And so I'm not surprised that people are out enjoying that weather. But for those of you who are here in person and watching on the interweb, I'm going to try and maybe expand upon some of the things that Sheane was saying. You know, recently in Red Deer, last week, in fact, our Premier, Danielle Smith, was speaking in Red Deer. And she said something a little bit strange, and I'm going to share it with you, and maybe it might tickle your brain a little bit. She was asked about Alberta independence. And she said, well, you know, we don't really need a divorce. We just need counseling. And, you know, as you heard, I'm a lawyer. I used to do divorce law, family law, until I wised up a little bit and got out of that. But that got me thinking, well, okay, counseling sounds good, right? Right? We want to preserve marriages. But what if your spouse is a psychopath? Like, what if your spouse is like Hannibal? What if he wants to kill you and eat your liver with some farmer beans and a nice Chianti? Counseling's not going to work. So I believe, and I'm going to explain to you tonight why counseling isn't going to work, and why our current political leadership, including Danielle Smith, for all her many merits and talents and things that she does for us, is not going to lead us to any place good for Alberta. All the things that Sheane talked about that have been Alberta's situation since time immemorial are just going to continue unless we change the picture. And by the way, the picture that we have of our lives right now is changing. The ground is moving. You're all sitting, but the ground is moving beneath your feet. And I'm going to explain to you how that's working. You've probably been hearing our esteemed Prime Minister, our estimable Prime Minister, Mark Carney, the installed one, talking about something called the New World Order. In fact, every time you hear him speak, he talks about the New World Order. What have you noticed about the New World Order? What's missing? He never tells you what in heaven it is. So, big reveal. I'm going to tell you, because listen, this information is out there. You can go and find it for yourselves. I've done the homework, and now I'm going to share it with you, okay? Here's what it is. I want to speak to you tonight about something that's really profound and urgent. It's called the rise of Homo Deus. You know what that is? It's Latin. It means human God. And there's a man named Yuval Harari. I hesitate to call him a man. He's more of a Cretan. But he is one of the big guys at the World Economic Forum. In fact, he's their main intellectual. And he wrote a book called Homo Deus, which sold about 45 million copies. It's not as many as the Bible, but it's a lot of books, a lot more than I've sold. So if you want to help me out, the table's over there tonight, $20. Shameless plug. But this Homo Deus is not a distant sci-fi fantasy. I'm going to explain to you why. It's actually the engineered future being imposed on us right now. So what we're witnessing, what I'm saying to you is that this is not a random policy failure like the ones that Sheane was talking about. But those bills he was describing, that's the implementation of the New World Order. And this is not political incompetence. This is not f***ing around in the dark like Justin Trudeau. This is a coordinated, multi-act drama aimed at reshaping humanity itself, changing everything we know, everything we love. So, and this is going to come in 4 acts. Has anybody been to a live stage play? Okay, well, if you know your Shakespeare, usually it's 4 acts, right? So here we go. There's Act 1. Act 1 is called The Illusion of Scarcity. You know about this? Okay. The problem is not a lack of resources, okay? There's enough money, there's enough food, there's enough water, surely there's enough land, and in Alberta, there's enough energy for all of humanity to thrive. Agreed? Okay. The true crisis is that we have handed over control of these resources to psychopaths. Okay. You know what a psychopath is? Okay. Well, I'll explain it to you. This is the legal meaning. A psychopath is not insane. A psychopath is in full control of their mental capacities. What a psychopath is a person who would have the same emotional response to killing you as they would to swatting a fly. That's a psychopath. And these are the people running our country. That's who's in control. That's why your life feels so uncertain. That's why it feels scary. That's why you don't feel like you can plan for the future. That's why you feel like your kids and grandchildren, this place isn't going to be here for them anymore. That's why. It's the illusion of scarcity, okay? So who's doing it? Well, it's these elites who prioritize power over people. And in Canada and across the West, we see this in various forms. There's record immigration targets, push without any parliamentary debate. Did you vote for mass immigration? Raise your hand if you did. Probably not. Did you know it's never worked out? All the way back, the Roman Empire went down because of mass immigration. I mean, it's all there in history. And they're using this. Strained housing, which is connected to mass immigration, healthcare, and social cohesion, right? The isolation, not knowing our neighbors, right? And we see it in the deliberate sabotage of our energy infrastructure. Policies that hobble reliable resources while promising green utopias that never materialize and just make people, the so-called elites, very, very rich. This isn't just mismanagement. This isn't just buffoonery. It's managed decline. What's the goal? What's the goal? To make us dependent, immobile, and poorer. Why? So that we're ripe for control. If you feel like we're already at the end of Act 1, it's because we are, okay? So let's talk about Act 2. Act 2 is the erosion of sovereignty and the transnational machine. Let me explain about this. So this Liberal Party, they call themselves the Liberal Party. But those of you old enough to remember, this is not the Liberal Party that you know. This is not the Liberal Party of Paul Martin. This is not even the Liberal Party of Jean Chrétien. In fact, if you remember back to the early 90s, it pains me to say this, I have to twist my arm here. Jean Chrétien was actually not a bad prime minister, certainly in comparison to Justin Trudeau or Mark Carney. And in fact, Paul Martin, who eventually became our prime minister, was one of the best financial ministers that we ever had. And the reason why is because he came from a background, a very, very wealthy shipping background. His family were shipping, and he knew how to manage budgets. And they cut like crazy. Because what they were dealing with in the early 90s was all the wastage that was there from Trudeau and then Mulroney. So, but that Liberal Party is gone, okay? The Liberal Party that you knew that they pretend to be, that is gone. So what's left? What's left is a transnational globalist agenda, which Carney calls this New World Order. This views nations like Canada, borders, and individual freedoms as obstacles. That's all stuff we have to get rid of, okay? That's what, when Carney says that there's been a rupture, okay, he's not talking about something that happened in his pants. He's talking about, maybe that's happening, I don't know, ask his doctor. But what he's talking about is when he says rupture, he means everything that we know, that we love about Canada, that binds us together, shared values, political representative democracy, loving your neighbor, supremacy of God, the rule of law, that stuff's all gone. Throw it away. We don't need that anymore, okay? Canadian sovereignty is being dismantled piece by piece through supranational commitments, okay? Unchecked bureaucracy, policies that prioritize international visions over citizens' needs. Let me give you an example. This just happened. Those of you in this community know all about the right? Snowbirds are a very important training program for our National Air Force. A lot of the guys who go into the Snowbirds, they use those as training planes, and then they go on to become our best and brightest pilots. In fact, one of the men who just went to the moon recently started his career in one of those planes. Well, guess what? Our Prime Minister just shut down that program for 6 years. Do you know why? Because they've borrowed money to give to Ukraine, where our former Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is there. Money laundering. You start to see the picture? Okay. So wealth is stripped via inflation. You all know about inflation if you've been to a grocery store recently. Regulation and restricted mobility. Remember COVID? Okay. Freedom erodes under the guise of safety. They promise, The world is ruptured. Be afraid. Be very afraid. We'll protect you. Well, how is this government protecting you? How is this government that spends more money on the Indigenous, who comprise about 3% of our national population, they spend more money on the Indigenous than they do on national defense? Just drink that in for a second. What's the number one job of our federal government? What's their number one job? Do you know? To protect our borders. What else do we need them for? Seriously. What else do we need a national government for? All of our local government can do just about everything else. From policing to healthcare to even taxation. We don't need those guys in Ottawa. The only reason why we have them is to protect our borders. Well, they're not protecting our borders. They're opening our borders to all the people we need protection from. You get the picture? Okay, so this is Act 2. The evidence, I don't need to tell you, is in the outcomes. Declining living standards, cultural fragmentation, and a growing disconnect between the rulers and the ruled. These people are supposed to be our servants, supposed to be our public servants, right? They're not our servants. They see themselves as elected masters. Our prime minister spent over $200,000 on a meal during a flight, a transcontinental flight. Okay? This prime minister he set a record for having the most international trips in a year. He even beat Trudeau, if you can believe that. Okay? Okay, Act 3. This is something called hackable animals without free will. This is important. So drawing from ideas I mentioned about Yuval Harari, these guys treat humans as hackable animals. What does that mean? They see us as biological machines lacking true consciousness or free will. Programmable, like a computer, through data, algorithms, and narrative control. Technology, surveillance, behavioral science become tools to manage the herd. Stories replace truth. Like hantavirus is going to get you. Okay? Algorithms shape our desires. We laugh at things like honor and tradition and virtue, and we're shocked by betrayal and chaos in our midst. As C.S. Lewis warned, he said, "We make men without chests and we expect from them virtue and enterprise." This is the spiritual void at the heart of the project. The spiritual void, the material abundance or its promise exchanged for meaning, dignity, and autonomy. Okay, what's Act 4? What's the final act? The final reveal in this 4-act play is the elevation of a man-made digital god. I know, sounds crazy. This is real. These guys actually think that they are going to create a general intelligence AI that is going to run absolutely everything, that is going to know all, see all, and most of all, control all. They're doing it through those little things in your pockets. They're doing it when they take your picture at Walmart. They're doing it right now. Hello. So AI, centralized digital systems, and technocratic governance promise godlike mastery over life, longevity, happiness, control over nature. But they demand something that is very, very important: total submission. Okay? Humanity bows not to a divine creator, but to silicon overlords and their high priests in Davos and Brussels or Ottawa boardrooms. Free will, forget it, obsolete. We as individuals, we dissolve into data points. Sovereignty yields to global governance. This is Homo Deus. Human beings upgraded, in their view, into something post-human. See, when they say post-nation state, what they really mean is post-human state. Because the nation is just an expression of the individuals who inhabit it. Okay, what is a nation? A nation is a group of people with shared values connected to land. Well, you can see how they're disconnecting us from our land, disconnecting us from each other. And I'm telling you, this is where they're going. And unfortunately, if they succeed, they're going to strip us of what makes us truly human. So where do we stand? Well, my friends, this is not inevitable. This is good news. This is a scary play. It's a horror show, okay? History shows that aware, courageous people, like Albertans, can push back against tyranny dressed as progress. We've done this before. We have the hearts, we have the courage, but we've got to reclaim our resources from those who hoard and weaponize them. We've got to defend sovereignty. We've got to defend our borders and democratic accountability. That's the big one. We have to reject this idea that humans are mere hackable code. We have to affirm our God-given dignity, free will, and capacity for virtue. And we have to live up to that. And that's hard. We have to speak truth in our circles. We have to live not by lies. We have to build parallel structures of family, community, faith, and local resilience. We have to question their narratives. When Carney talks about New World Order, question that. What are you talking about, New World Order? I like the order we have now. In fact, I like the way it was before 2015 when you guys came along. And we have to demand evidence over just edict, right? But you know, folks, the most important part of it is our faith. Whether in God or reason or human potential, this matters more than ever right now. And we have to ask the question, will we surrender to a digital God, a false idol, a new Babel, if you know your Old Testament? Or will we rediscover the spark that made us capable of greatness in the first place? That's a goal worth fighting for, isn't it? So the choice is ours, but the hour is late. We've got between now and October 19th, we've got this referendum. We've got a chance to say no to these people who want to destroy us, who see us as useless eaters. By the way, that term was penned by a man you might know from history named Adolf Hitler. It's in his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. He used that term, useless eaters. That same term is in Yuval Harari's book. So if you don't get how dangerous these people are, then you haven't been listening tonight, and I hope you have. So let's choose wisely with chests that are full and open. God bless Alberta, and God bless you. Thank you. I can't believe I forgot to introduce the star of our show. Chris Scott, who's responsible for organizing all of this. Courageous man who I got to know during the quote-unquote pandemic. And I'm honored to know him, although I've said before in these shows, he irritates me because he's the only guy who gets a standing ovation at these things. But it's wrong to be envious. And so here's Chris Scott.
Green one? Yep. This is green. It's still green. This is the green one. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Am I the only one that feels a little bit uneasy when a lawyer mentions that you're the responsible party? I mean, I've heard that before in court, and it generally doesn't go well for that person, but whatever. I'll take it this time. Well, thank you all for coming. Before I begin, I have a very important question, and I need you to be brutally honest. How many people are here who are on the fence or opposed to the idea of Alberta independence? Be brave. There's always one. Okay, on the fence, yeah. No, that's good. The reason I ask that, and if you are opposed or on the fence, that's okay. You don't. Oh, there. Hey, now we got sound. We don't have to. We're not trying to pick on you or anything. I just wanted to say thank you for coming, because that's the point of this Let's Talk Alberta initiative, is that we start talking about these things. we have a fairly significant and important question coming up in 160 days, correct? 160-ish days. I mean, it might be held over a little bit, who knows, but it's going to be somewhere around there. In my opinion, this is the most important question that Albertans will be asked likely in our lifetime. There is no election, federal or provincial, no municipal election, no school board, no anything that's going to have as big a consequence as the question that you're going to be asked in October. And that terrifies me, not because of the question, but because I am acutely aware that the majority of Albertans don't understand the implications of the question or the details surrounding it. The majority of Albertans, up until a few years ago, probably didn't even know what a constituency association was. I didn't. Let alone how Alberta became part of Confederation, what were the conditions. I didn't even know that we became a province because we were legislated by Ottawa. That was news to me. And I think that the majority of Albertans kind of are in those same shoes. They just don't know. Most people are quite confused about not just the question, but the situation around it. So if you get a group of people going into a question that's important, a question of that magnitude and that importance, and they're confused, the outcome is not going to probably be the best outcome. So Let's Talk Alberta wants to go to every single corner of Alberta, 6 times. And we want to get as many people in rooms as we can to talk about these things, specifically to answer your questions. For those of you that might be on the fence about sovereignty, maybe you're emotionally attached to Canada, kind of like I am, by the way, to be honest. Maybe you have some things that you need answered. Maybe you have some concerns. Maybe you have people in your circle of friends or your family who feel like a sovereign Alberta would be detrimental to them because of A, B, or C. Maybe some people in this room are concerned about your pensions. Maybe some people in this room are concerned about taxes or federal transfers, those types of things. These are all legitimate concerns, and they're all things that we need to talk about. But it's important that we talk about them and we get to the truth, we get to the facts, and then we decide what we want in October. If we don't do that, if we allow the majority of Alberta to continue to be walking around in this political stupor, not really understanding things, I fear we will have missed the greatest opportunity that we've ever had even as Canadians. And why do I say even as Canadians? I mean, we decided to be a country and became independent and sovereign and wrote a constitution and these things, and we self-govern, right? No. None of those things have ever happened in Canada. This was also news to me, and what a shock it was. Because I started going to school in the mid-'80s. I'm 46 years old. What do we start going to school? 6 years old, 5 years old, something like that? So I guess it would have been about 1984, 1985. 1984, I guess it would have been. That was 2 years after the Constitution was brought back to Canada from the UK. It was a very exciting time in politics. We got our charter rights and freedoms. We had this new Constitution. We're the freest country in the world because the government told us what rights we have. See what I did there? And there was this idea, this feeling that the future was so bright because we'd always be free. And many people around the world believed that. Many people felt that. So much so that they would work their butts off in their home countries, sell everything they had, and go thousands of miles away to another land for freedom and opportunity and prosperity. That's what Canada was. It was the destination for people that wanted to make something of themselves and be free. How sad is it that in the last few years we've actually seen people fleeing this country because they don't feel like the freedoms are there anymore. So we believed these things to be true. We thought that when Pierre Elliott Trudeau brought the Constitution back, that this was our big deal. But since then, I've learned that even the inception of Canada wasn't anything to do with you, the people, or me, or I mean, this is 150 years ago. But the people occupying the land, working hard, breaking land and building things, homesteading, surviving winters, or not even. We believed that it was this grassroots, ambitious endeavor to create a free country. Then I find out that not only did we not get together in rooms like this and talk about how we wanted to be governed and what our country was going to look like, but our leaders of the day actually went to another nation and they sat with their elite, with the crown, and they drafted a piece of legislation called the British North America Act and imposed it over the Dominion of Canada and told the people there, this is how you're going to be governed. Well, that's not freedom, sovereignty, or independence. That's self-governance, sure. But still under a king, still under a governor general, still under a colonial imperialistic empire that rewarded those that kept peace, order, and good governance. And we lived like this for years, not really understanding what it meant to sovereign individuals with rights granted by God, with big G, not by government. We didn't get it. Even in 1982, when the Charter was enshrined in the Constitution, we didn't quite grasp, well, some did, but the majority didn't grasp what it means when the government enumerates your rights and freedoms and tells you these are the ones you have. That's all fine and dandy, but my question is, if you're telling me that those are my rights and freedoms, what about the ones you didn't write down? What about property rights? You didn't put that on there, Pierre. What about freedom of speech? You didn't put that on there. You put thought, religion, and expression. So we live under a system that implies that the government grants us what we have. And if you paid attention to what Leighton just said, it makes perfect sense. The ultimate measure of control is when somebody who you don't influence tells you what you may not do, and there's nothing you can do about it. Isn't it strange? Isn't it strange how we missed all of that? From 1867 all the way forward to 2026, we missed it. And we actually had some cues from history. We had some cues from the United States War of Independence. Right? They fought for 6 years, a bloody war against the King of England. Lost tens of thousands of lives in a time, by the way, where there's no antibiotics, no anesthetics, nothing. It was just horrible, the things that happened. And they fought, they triumphed over their oppressors, and the oppression was a 2% tax, and they didn't feel represented by that government. That's what started this whole thing. And then they decided that they were going to declare their independence and write a constitution that they wrote, the people write. So the people did that. They wrote a document that it told those people who wished to govern, this is how you may govern. This is what we will allow you to do. These are our rights and not limited to. We're going to keep making amendments after this. And make sure that the government knows what our rights are, clearly. And it's going to put boundaries on government. So much so that we're going to make sure that our foundational document, our Constitution, grants us the right to a militia. Not just so we can go and build a dam if we need to, but to protect against government tyranny. Why was the Second Amendment so important? Because the Founding Fathers realized that government, if left unchecked, if there's no balance between the strength of government and the strength and will of the people, the government will always tyrannize the people. And you might not like this reality, but that's why the Second Amendment is there. That's why there's also a right to a well-regulated militia, specifically to protect against government tyranny. That's what happened when people decided to be sovereign, to affirm their sovereignty and their right to demand consent from those who wish to govern them, to grant them that governance. Canada never did that. We didn't. And I'll debate anyone that says that we did. You go back through the British North America Act, and that does not read like a constitution that the people wrote. That reads like an instruction manual that another sovereign nation imposed on a colony to maintain control, to continue harvesting resources and building wealth while keeping control. Canada has always been about control. That's why the Canada you see today doesn't look like the Canada that was before 82 that Dr. Michael Wagner talks about all the time. Because these mechanisms of control have accelerated and evolved and morphed into things that can actually put you in jail or bankrupt you for the crime of calling a biological female a female, or calling a biological male a male. The crime of hurting somebody's feelings. The crime of offending someone. I've said for years, I've watched this my whole adult life. Europe and the UK, they're about 5 years ahead of Canada, 4 to 5 years ahead of Canada with their ridiculous, deluded policy, right? Like 5 years ago, we were watching people in Europe paying, $2 a liter for gas and be like, oh, thank goodness we don't live in Europe. I mean, those guys, they're crazy. They're literally taxing cow farts. What are we doing here? They're locking people up for their Facebook posts in the UK. They're controlling people's speech and thought. When I was in London, I made a point to go and I stood at the exact spot where a woman was arrested for being in public and praying in her head. She offended other people. And they reported her to the police, and they said, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm just standing here." "Well, are you praying?" "Well, yeah, but silently in my head, it's offensive. You're under arrest." How far do we have to allow these things to go before we do something about it? How long do we have to live under a structure that never was designed for you and was always designed to maintain those mechanisms of control? How long? Are we going to do something about it when we surpass the 50% threshold of tax? Oh, wait, we did that already. We work until July to pay the government, and then we start earning money for ourselves and our families. Are we going to let it get to the point where we can no longer engage in the industries that fuel and feed the nation because somewhere it hailed or there was a wildfire? Oh, wait, we're already doing that. Are we going to continue down this path until the government tells our farmers that they suggest, remember the wheat board was a suggestion too, they suggest that you put 30% of your land back to wilderness because climate change and biodiversity? Oh, wait. They're doing that right now in Holland. 4 years ago, I hopped on a plane with about 10 days' notice, and I flew to Amsterdam without knowing anybody there, without knowing where I was going to stay, and not a lot of money, because I watched a Facebook video of Dutch farmers protesting policies that were doing that. They were actually taking their farms from them. They're imposing these policies, environmental lunacy policies, and it was forcing farmers off their land. And the goal, as the Dutch government said, was, no, we want to get rid of farming. There's too many farmers. There's too many farms. It's causing climate catastrophes. And so they pushed them off their farms. 3,000 when I was there 4 years ago. So I went there because I wanted to stand with and talk to and get to know the Dutch farmers that were protesting these things. Because 2 years before, I watched Dutch farmers flying Canadian flags with their tractors and trucks supporting the Canadian truckers when we were in Ottawa. So I wanted to go there and I wanted to stand with them as well. And the things that I heard blew my mind, but they're here now. That was 2 years ago. Mechanisms of control that we never would have believed. 20 years ago, would you have thought in your wildest dreams that not only would we allow men dressed as women to have our children sit on their laps while they're reading them books that they have no business reading, but if you said something about it or protested it, you'd go to jail? You could never have convinced me that that was going to happen. And now I think this is on the topic of Alberta independence is so scary because we don't know what it's going to be like. Well, I know it's not going to be better. If we don't do anything, the status quo, I don't think things are getting better. I know they're getting worse. I know that we're on a downward trajectory. I can't imagine if we just let this happen and we look back 20 years from now, what will we be saying? 20 years ago, could you have imagined that this was going to happen? The fear of the unknown for me is so much less than the fear of what I know to be true, what is demonstrable in policy, in society, in law. What we see happening around us is infinitely more troubling than the opportunity of Albertans being able to decide what their future looks like. That's what this is really about. This is not about paying less taxes, although that will be nice. This is not about, finally having grown-ups that are negotiating our trade deals, but that would be nice. This is not about getting another pipeline or 5 and shipping oil east and west and more south, although that would be nice. This is about, for the first time in Canadian history, not just Alberta's history, the first time in Canadian history that the people have the opportunity to be the ones that chart their course, the ones that influence their future. Because we don't do that right now. Alberta has this opportunity that other nations, other peoples have fought and died for. They've literally fought wars that lasted hundreds of years to get the opportunity to do what we're going to be asked on a ballot in October. And because of that, it's not lost on me the burden that each one of us carries to bring this conversation to the rest of the people in Alberta. Every one of them. We have a duty, an obligation, a moral obligation to those who actually fought for our opportunities at freedom. We have a moral obligation in their memory to pursue freedom and independence and sovereignty. And the only way we can do that is by having conversations. That's why Let's Talk Alberta exists. Because we need to have these conversations. We need to blanket this entire Alberta in a sea of facts and information that support the inevitable conclusion that Alberta independence is not only necessary, but it is inevitable. We need to train leaders, ambassadors for independence, disciples for sovereignty to go out into Alberta and spread this message one-on-one, face-to-face. There's half the chairs in this room are empty. That's okay, because this isn't about filling rooms like this, although it would be nice. This is about encouraging you folks to go back out into your community, your circles of trust, those who you have a relationship with, and have these conversations. When they say, oh, Alberta independence, that will never happen, your response should be, oh, let's talk about that. And listen to what they're saying. When people have these unhinged emotional outbursts about it, you know the ones I'm talking about, they grit their teeth and they just clench right up like that. Our job is not to be like, I need an old priest, a young priest, some water, and a crucifix, please. Our job is to listen to them and dig down and drill down into that emotional outburst and find where it's coming from. Oftentimes, you'll find something like that person relies on an entitlement from the federal government and they see independence or sovereignty as a threat to their life because they will no longer receive the money they get from the federal government. Well, now we can talk about that. But you got to talk about it. So I've been talking too long, which is pretty usual. Thank you for putting up with me. We're going to go into a Q&A in about 10 minutes. And I say 10 minutes because we're also long-winded. I know your legs are probably asleep. You need to get up and walk around, maybe chat a little bit. You know, perhaps maybe some people have noticed that there's a table over there with all sorts of great Alberta stuff that's slightly overpriced, but is great for conversation starters. I see some people wearing them. Thank you very much. You may have noticed that my friend Leighton and his family, they've got some cool stuff over there and some books that he's written. When you buy a book from someone like Leighton, you're buying something more valuable than just a book. That's hundreds of hours and years, actually, of accrued wisdom put down in a book so that you can digest these thoughts easily and use them in your day-to-day lives. That's pretty valuable. That goes with any of our presenters that bring these things. When you go buy one of those shirts from Brad and Bahra, you're not just getting a t-shirt, you're getting a message. You're getting a conversation starter. What do I see that one from here? Freedom from tyranny, FAFO. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure it would be a conversation starter. So please take 10 minutes, grab a drink and a t-shirt and a book, and we'll come back, reconvene for a Q&A. And the one thing I'm going to ask you, no, I'll ask you more things later, but one thing I would like to ask you is that when you're thinking about questions to ask, I want you to ask the questions that you think are the toughest. I want you to try and convince me and Leighton and Sheane that Alberta shouldn't be sovereign. Please do. If you have things that your neighbors have said, oh, we can't pursue independence because of this, I want to hear it. I want you to tell me why we can't do this, and then I'll talk to you about it. I'll talk with you about it. Thank you very much.
So we're going into intermission mode, guys. The washrooms are on that side over there. And we'll see you in a bit. Yeah, I was talking about, it's like, why is that we can hear Chris Scott, whatever, because at the beginning, it's just that this is a brand new mixer I got from last week, and there's the pad button on channel 3 where Chris was talking and was chipping up like 30 decibels off of the line, which is kind of weird, but it's all good now. So we'll see you in a bit. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget the super chats in the e-transfers. Helps things a little bit here, because in the knock in the woods. Oh, the Starling issue. Oh, thanks, thank you. Somebody give me $50. That's good. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we'll see you in a bit. Intermission mode.
Of favors from you. The first favor is this is all done by volunteers and the like, and we can't fund it. We're not getting funding from the states. We're not getting, so there's two gentlemen that will be going around with the donation bin. If you're able to put something in there to help, that is greatly appreciated. If you're not, it's understandable. But if you're able to, that's great. The second one is actually going to take a little bit of a commitment from you. The algorithm on social media and like is killing us. When we put out a poster, quite often people are coming back and saying, we did not get it until 5 or 6 days after an event occurred. So I need everybody to go to letstalkalberta.com or freedomcalendar.net or the Whistle Stop Cafe Facebook page. Find all the events that are coming up in the future and send them to people that you know in those areas and tell them to pass them on to friends and the like in that area. It's like the old shampoo commercial from the 70s and 80s. You tell two friends and they'll tell two friends and so on. That's the only way we're going to beat this algorithm. So if you would do that, that would be greatly appreciated. I encourage you to watch our live streams that happen most of the time when we have it on the Whistle Stop. You can also go and watch them live on freedomcalendar.net quite often. So between the two, you should be able to watch just about every event. And we've got a lot of good speakers that are out there speaking. Just watch them and then you can hear them all. And if you see something that particularly hits home, take and share it with somebody that you think needs to hear it. So now we're just waiting for Christopher to get his camera all adjusted.
Before we get going, I just want to let everyone know, you remember how I said that if you tell the truth, Max, can you turn me down a bit, please? If you tell the truth about something, you can be fined or jailed or whatever under some current laws. Well, a friend of ours, Benita from Westlock, she's actually going to court because she handed out some flyers opposing the idea of rainbow crosswalks and rainbow flags on city property, advocating for neutrality when it comes to city property. And so now someone's taking her to the Human Rights Tribunal, the Human Rights Kangaroo Court, I guess you'd call it. And I think there's actually a poll in, is it Lake, where is it?
It's in the local newspaper.
Which local newspaper?
The Cold Lake News, I believe.
Lakeland Connect? Is that the paper here?
Yeah.
Lakeland Review. So I think there's a poll there, and it's basically asking what you think about this. I would suggest for you folks here and for you folks watching at home, go and answer that poll. We need to send a clear signal that the court of public opinion appreciates truth, even when truth is uncomfortable and offensive. And Benita could really use your support on that. Also, I'm gonna be doing I'll do a podcast with her in the within the next week or so, with her and her lawyer talking about some of these things and what exactly is going on and what the implications could mean for other people. So stay tuned for that. And now we can go to the questions.
Okay, so if you have a question, put your hand up, and Brad will come with the microphone. He will not let go of the microphone. He will keep his hand on the microphone. And please keep it to a question. And okay, we'll get started.
All right. Do you want me to stand?
It doesn't matter. That's fine.
Okay, I feel more comfortable. Oh, yes. How's that, Brad? Hello. All right. This could be for Mr. Leighton and for Chris to answer once I'm done. Okay, it's on alloidial titles, your favorite. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of history first, how this all came about from what we hear from Doug Force, who unfortunately is no longer with us. Anyways, so back in 2021, there was a group of farmers and ranchers, southern Manitoba and southern Saskatchewan, third, fourth, fifth generational farmers, right? Ranchers, applied for alloidial titles because they owned their land. So they managed to do that, having to go through the crown and monarch and all those stages and land titles and everything else. They were successful. But no sooner were they successful that Mr. Trudeau, and I can't stand saying that name, stopped it from ever happening further. So no one else could go ahead and get alloidial titles. Because if they did, the lawyers were immediately disbarred. So we've got quite the justice system of communism at its highest already. So as an independent Alberta, could we and would we see landowners that outright own their titles be able to get alloidial titles to pass on from generation to generation in their own families?
That's a great question.
I told you, Chris, it was going to be a stumper for you.
Don't worry, I'm not stumped.
Okay. And I don't want to hear that,
We'll tell you the truth.
Word salad. Just tell me the brass
Knuckles.
Sure. Okay, thank you. We'll start with that. I have another one after.
This is kind of a complex legal issue that you raise. So if you want to know more about this, actually this is a shameless plug, on my show, if you go check it out, it's called Gray Matter. A piece recently called Aboriginal Entitlement. And there, the focus of the piece was on what's happening in Cowichan, in BC, and other places, in UNDRIP, and how Canadian land rights, traditional private property rights, are being destroyed. But in that explanation, and I'll just give a kind of a short version of it, I explain how the concept of Crown ownership of all the land came to be. And you're right, it's a bit of a sleight of hand. So alloidial title means that there was title in the land, private ownership of land, which predates and precedes the Crown coming into ownership of it, okay? And what happened is when the British came here and they installed their systems of law, which we inherited, a couple of things came with it. One is the doctrine of tenure, but also the doctrine of discovery. And the doctrine of discovery basically said that, and if you know your history, the British weren't the only ones doing it. The French, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Germans even, the Belgians, were going all over the world and saying, mine, 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 mine. And the doctrine of discovery basically said that, if you were the European nation that made contact with that land, then it was yours. And in the context of the British Empire, this concept of tenure came in. And so just through the magic of saying it was theirs, it belonged to the Crown. Some people have tried to successfully challenge this through alloidial title, and there are situations where you can do it. What's interesting about what's happening in BC is this. The Supreme Court of Canada, who no one elected, and having no authority whatsoever to do this, back in 1997, in a case called Delgamuckw, say that 5 times really fast, invented something called Aboriginal title. What's interesting about Aboriginal title is that the Supreme Court has said that Aboriginal title actually is exempt from this concept of Crown tenure. In other words, that because the Indigenous were here before the Crown, that the land that they're being given, never belonged to the Crown. Well, couldn't you make the same argument about people who own land that the Crown never owned? So if you can show that the Crown never owned certain lands, that they were exempt, it seems to me the same argument could be applied. But you're right. This Crown, and talking about the federal government now, has an agenda. It's Agenda 2030. It's out there that, we will own nothing and we will be happy. We will be miserable. They'll be happier because they'll own all our stuff, and we'll be just paying them. See, these people, they really love the European aristocracy. Always loved communism because communism was just repackaged feudalism. Karl Marx actually wasn't a very smart guy. He was actually a plagiarist, and he just ripped off an old idea. The old feudalism idea was that, you'd have a lord or an earl or a duke or a baron, and he would own everything, and people just would work their lives out taking care of his assets while he rode around and hunted foxes and did whatever. These guys, these people, these so-called elites, this aristocracy, they love this idea. They think this is great. And what they want to do is they want to destroy our private ownership. They want to destroy the whole history of the middle class that grew out of the Reformation, the Renaissance, right? And especially the American Revolution. They want to destroy all that, take all that away, and take us back hundreds of years to a way of living that was full of pestilence and starvation and degradation and genocide. That's what they really want. So what I was talking about today in my speech, I was just basically describing, it's just the new feudalism. And so alloidal title is an interesting idea. To answer your bigger question about what would be the system of land ownership in Alberta, well, I think that's up to Albertans. I think, like what Chris was saying, we have to stop this idea of top-down leadership. I want to see Albertans tell us, well, what kind of a constitution do you want to have? What kind of country do you want to have? I think Albertans, more than anything else, as I go around and I talk with them and I listen, they tell me they want a good country. They want a country they can be proud of, that's safe, that they love, that that preserves their family history, right? And that's not the country that Canada's offering right now. So alloidial title might be one of those ideas that we should talk about. Let's look at a different type of land ownership. Maybe it's not alloidial title, maybe it's a blend. But this idea that the Crown owns all the land, I think we can see, like many of the ideas that came through from Canada, is something that we need to scrutinize and ask a question. Well, can we do this better? And that's a great opportunity of independence. We get the opportunity to ask, okay, can we do this better? Want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So when people approach me with the concept of allodial title, oftentimes it's accompanied with the idea that if you have that, well, now you're sovereign over your land, nobody can take it, you don't have to pay property taxes, you don't have to pay your mortgage. I've met many people who have gone down that path and they've lost their homes. There's a second part of property ownership that people don't think about. And that is, even if you have allodial title and you own your land, even if we have real property rights and you own that property, you only own it so long as you can defend it, right? We're actually not allowed to defend our property in this country. We're not allowed to defend ourselves against government. We're not allowed. It's completely illegal. In Canada, I think the only crime that's higher than forming a militia is like outright treason or something like that. We're not allowed. So there's two parts of this, and sovereignty requires both. Sovereignty requires that you have a right to property, but it also requires that you have the ability and the right to defend said property. If the people that have allodial title, this came up a lot during COVID, and they were using it to say, okay, well, AHS, you can't come on my land because I have allodial title. It doesn't matter. They never cared. They have the means to enforce their laws whether or not they're just. They just come in and they have the guys with the guns and the cages in their cars, and they have the jails and they have the courts, and they take you and they put you in it, right? You're not allowed to defend. So it's important to remember this. If we're talking about how do you maintain freedom, prosperity, and property ownership in a new Alberta, well, that has to be accompanied with the ability to defend your rights, and we don't have that right now. Sure. Well, just hold on a sec. And actually, you know what? We have to come back to that because we do have other questions, but we'll come back to your second one after, okay?
Sure. Which is not to do with this.
No, back there first. She's had her hand up. Yeah.
Sorry for that.
So I have found that when I'm discussing with friends and neighbors, et cetera, that oh, okay. I find that a lot of people are afraid because their livelihood is either directly or indirectly tied to the base. Do we have a plan for the base? And all the other bases in Alberta. But being as how we're in Cold Lake, we have one of the biggest Air Force bases, and that has come up time and time again. And I'm finding that I would love to hear what your thoughts are because I haven't known how to answer that question.
Well, it's a negotiation thing for starters, right? Like there's different paths we could take. We could negotiate maybe purchasing the assets and sending a bill to send the scrap that we force our soldiers to use right now away. we could have an arrangement where maybe they could keep their bases. I mean, we don't have to be bad neighbors. That's other countries in the world do it all over the place. It's a negotiation thing. The real key thing there is that there's an asset that both Alberta and Canada depend on, right? So there has to be a negotiation. And this is actually an interesting opportunity for Alberta, specifically in independent Alberta, that would have, say, Canadian Forces bases on our soil, which I wouldn't be opposed to. I mean, Canada should be a good neighbor. Maybe in exchange for that, well, maybe the Canadian Forces actually come and help when there's a natural disaster, when there's wildfires or a flood or something. Right now, they really don't. I mean, only in the most severe cases. When there's trucks at the border, Jason Kenney will call the military to go and use their equipment to tow trucks away. But short of that, it's just a service we pay for, and we really don't. I hate to say it, but do you feel that our nation is secure? No. Okay, enough said. It's an opportunity to fix that and mend some fences along the way.
Yeah, the starting point is under the Constitution. Section 9213 says all property and civil rights is in the province. So that would include all lands. And Sheane was talking about the parks. I would argue that the same would apply to, the base. I don't know the particulars of that. I'd be interested to see whether there is a lease, for example, between the province and the federal government. I'm not sure the particulars of those. I'll tell you what concerns me about our military bases, though, is that in Canada right now, as we sit, there's about 500,000 Chinese troops in Canada, and they are using our military facilities, and this is something that's being withheld from Canadians, and it probably explains why ICE has a fully armed installation right now in the city of Calgary.
I can add the one thing to that. The Cold Lake Air Weapons Base is 100% owned by the province of Alberta. It is leased to the federal government.
Thanks for that. I wasn't sure. Thanks, Sheane.
And because of that fact, he said the Canadian Forces could be here. But as Chris has mentioned before, and I'm in favor of it, when we become independent, we're not going to have our own military to start with. And we can do like many other countries have, and that is have our neighbor to the south come in, and that is one of the most prime pieces of real estate in the world. So nobody would lose their jobs, because I guarantee you the Americans would be happy to come in and use it as a training base themselves. Under our governance.
I'd rather have the Americans running it than the Chinese. I don't know about you.
If you have questions, just raise your hand so we can see. Oh, gentleman over there, Brad on your left, the teacher over there.
So I'd like to answer a little bit of her question. Under the Canadian Species at Risk Act of Canada, also the Endangered Species Act of the United States are almost word for word the same, so the source was somewhere else. Any species introduced to any area for more than 50 years is indigenous. Humans are a species, Canada's an area, Alberta's an area. So I hate to say this, but you look like you're indigenous because over 50. So am I. Okay, so now I'd like to go to my question. Section 34 of the Canadian Constitution is the Equalization Act. I think it's 2 paragraphs long. I can't tell you exactly what it is off the top of my head. But there is an attaching document to that, like almost every other section. Does 70%, 7 provinces, and there's a population basis there as well. To change that act, is it required? Because you aren't changing the Constitution, you're only changing the supporting document.
I don't know about the supporting document.
If a constitutional amendment is required to get rid of equalization, then the answer is yes. But that's a big if. That's a serious. Yeah. Okay. That's a question I can't answer. It's beyond the scope of my knowledge. But if that document has been adopted and it's part of the Constitution, then it would require a constitutional amendment to get rid of it. That's my short answer to that. But the whole question of equalization is something quite different. I'm surprised that no one in Canada, no premier has tried to make this argument. But the whole idea that the country has to be run on this socialist scheme of everyone according to their ability to, or according to everyone else according to their need, is a very un-Canadian idea that was imported by Pierre Trudeau and the Club of Rome. And we had a referendum in 2021 on equalization. Albertans spoke on this. I believe it was 62% in favor of getting rid of it. And the UCP government has done absolutely nothing with that. And I think the reason why they've done absolutely nothing with that is because they don't want to get into the conversation about the Constitution, because that referendum, if you think about it carefully, was actually a referendum on independence. So in a real sense, and this is why I think, I'm going to go on record here, I think the result of the referendum is going to be roughly the same as the equalization. That's what I think is going to happen, because we've already had it. I think that's what when people voted on equalization, I think they were really voting on we've had enough of what's going on in Canada. And that's really what the referendum is all about, in my opinion.
I think that's good.
Two more definitions. This comes from Victor Douglas Hansen, who is a historian.
Brilliant man, yes.
Definitions. Democratic socialism is communism.
Yeah.
Nationalistic democratic socialism is fascism.
Right.
And they're almost the same, and everybody says, oh, fascism is extreme right, communism is extreme left. It's actually in a circle. You start up here and you come down to the right, and that's on the fascism side. You come down on the left, and there's your communism side. And right square on the bottom is where they join, because the difference between the two are almost the same, except fascism picks the winner. And you brought up democratic socialism.
Yeah.
Most people don't know the definition.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the other important distinction between what we call communism and fascism is fascism is a word, it comes from the Italian fascisti. So we have the word in English, fasten, to bind, okay? So what fascism does is that it binds together, and we're seeing this in Canada, it binds together institutions that have power. So you have the courts, the engine of government, the executive government, big corporation, does this sound familiar? Big tech, okay? The universities and media, all in one, binds them all together. In a properly functioning, free and democratic society, like Canada promised to be, those institutions have to be independent, and they have to sort of keep a watchful eye on each other, and they have to be checks on each other. The most obvious example, and some of us can remember this, when the news organization, former news organization called CBC, actually used to pay attention to what happened in Parliament and used to criticize what was said in Parliament. We don't have that anymore. So that's the kind of the distinction between fascism and communism. Whereas under a communism totalitarian state, basically the government owns everything. I would say what we're living through in Canada right now is probably closer to fascism, or maybe the better term is really technocratic authoritarianism. That seems to be what the New World Order means.
Okay, so my name is Tanya. I live down the road here. So I hear a lot of stuff about Saskatchewan and Manitoba joining us. If that happened, what would that look like as a one country? Or would it be 3 little countries that are telling the federal government to fuck off?
Well, first off, before that could ever happen, each one of them under the Clarity Act has to answer the question of independence themselves. So, no. So that means that Alberta has to do it, Saskatchewan has to do it, Manitoba has to do it. After that, then it will be up to the people if they want that. It's ultimately, it will always have to be up to the people. It's not about what leaders want and the length. So if it happened organically and everybody wanted it in southern, it would never be northern Manitoba. It would be southern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and possibly parts of BC. But it would have to happen organically. It could not happen just by everybody just deciding that that's going to happen at the upper level. It needs to be the people that decide that, in my opinion.
Okay, number 2 question. AI, data centers. As an independent Alberta, moving forward, what is, well, because you wouldn't know this really yet because there's no constitution write-up on it or anything, but we don't want it. And Albertans should speak out on it for themselves. And so having that come to a vote, referendum style as well, is going to be of the utmost importance. Because if you don't want this horary business, you just don't have AI data centers, period. There's one slated for Bonnyville, which is absolutely sickening. $1.5 billion, the Bonnyville Airport lately, talk about it there. So will we see that dissolved? And I guess it's really a retro question because it's the Albertans that will have to decide that, right?
I'll tell you, I'm not going to comment on whether or not we should have them. What's more important is it's the people that should decide how industry is regulated. Any industry. It shouldn't come from Switzerland. It shouldn't come from Germany. It should come from here. The policies around industry and the regulation around industry should be from the people who are going to suffer the consequences of the policy and regulation, right? So if you have an issue with AI data centers, then you have to articulate why. What is it about this particular industry that you dislike or you believe is a bad fit for Alberta? Then you need to convince other people. You need to advocate for that, bring people with you, and go and get it done. That's the way we do it. But under no circumstances should it be somebody in Davos, Switzerland, telling us that we need to eat bugs while they're eating steak, right? So it's less about that issue in particular and whether or not we're going to have it, but you got to roll that back to we're putting the ball in Albertans' hands in our court, and we're taking it out of the people who we can't affect's court.
I'm going to be even shorter than Chris. You answered your own question because you said right at the end, it's up to the people. And that is what it is. It's up to the people. Exactly what happens.
in regards to what you're saying, I went to a couple of the MD meetings, and they approved it, even though there was a whole bunch of us there who said, we don't want it here. Like, it's in our backyard.
This is a smaller one.
Yeah, well, they start small, like everything does, right? And the MD is not listening. They made their own decision based on whatever bullshit they were told that this was going to be. So, and as far as I was concerned, they were told a bunch of bullshit. It's safe. It's not going to be hard on the grid. It's friendly. It's just going to be like happy little kids playing in your backyard. Don't worry. We should be worried. Am I correct?
I don't know. Did anybody make a case as to why that wasn't the case? Like there's your MD, your municipalities, they will make decisions based on the bylaws. And the bylaws are made by them, right? They will consult with the public, but let me give you an example here. During COVID, there was a lot of people that phoned the MD and they said that they didn't like the Whistle Stop Cafe and it should be closed down. Should the MD have closed me down because they said so? No. If they had made a case backed with evidence and facts that determined that the Whistle Stop Cafe was a detriment to society, was unhealthy, all these things, then the MD would have looked at it. If it's a crowd of people that just say we don't like it, they're not going to do anything. So again, under the current structure, you have some ability to advocate against or for things within a municipality if you feel so inclined to, but you approach these things logically and with a consistent what do you call it? A pile of facts and evidence to support it, right?
I went to an appeal, but never much further right now.
I will touch on one other thing. The world is changing, correct? Most nations on earth are adopting some form of digital currency. They're going to do it. Most nations on earth are investing heavily in AI infrastructure. These are things that never existed when our previous constitutions were contemplated. Or were written. Nobody contemplated these things. So now we're in a situation where the world has advanced to the point where we have some things that are accessible by the tyrants that could be used by them to control us, for sure. Absolutely. Digital currency, digital ID, those types of things. If we don't think about how we can regulate that and protect our rights against those who wish to use them against us, well, we're just going to go along for the ride. So what does that entail? It's a constitutional amendment. We need to have not just laws, because laws can be changed every election cycle or even more. We need something enshrined that protects us going forward from the things that could be done to us using those things.
So this is a completely different subject, but because I live to the airbase here, does any of you three know what the hell can we do about the chemtrails that they're spraying on us right now, like daily? I want to know, is it possible that a whole bunch of us old ladies dress up in babushkas and go over to the airbase and say, what the fuck? What are you spraying on us? Can we stop it?
Okay, so full disclosure, I've spent a lot of time on this, and I don't believe that. I don't. I absolutely don't. There's plenty of things out there that people send me all the time, and they're saying, well, what about this? And I've spent a considerable amount of time. If you go back on my YouTube, you'll find a 3.5-hour video I did with probably one of the world's leading experts on these things, on whatever's going on up there. And we talked about all sorts of things. I hear this frequently. What are we going to do about the evil pilots that are pressing buttons and spraying us like bugs? Well, how do you know they're doing that? Well, I saw this thing on Facebook. What did you see on Facebook? I saw this. What does that actually mean? There is so, I'll tell you my theory. I think this is one of the greatest psyops ever put on us. I really do. I think there's a problem. I think there's a serious pollution problem. Our sky is not blue like it used to be. It's white. There's things that are different. There's a pile of pollution. And I believe that the people doing this are trying to make us all spin around in circles like ants chasing pilots that are pressing buttons in cockpits. I've found no evidence of that in particular. Not to say there's not something going wrong. Now, if you boil this all down to, if you strip everything away from it and you go at it from this angle, we see a problem and we need to solve the problem, right? The first thing we need to do is we need to find out exactly what the problem is. And that doesn't often involve Facebook research, which a lot of this is. People share lots of stuff all the time. We see it. There's people that make videos like that. But we have to really drill down and figure out what exactly do we know to be true for sure, and what are we kind of sure about but not really, and we need to focus on what we know and work towards that. If you want to know, my position on it, I'll say I'm not going to advocate that we do something to stop pilots from spraying us, because I don't believe that's happening. But if somebody could prove that, one of the 100,000 aircraft maintenance engineers that work on these airplanes say something, or the 40,000 commercial pilots in Canada, if any of them could prove it, or the ground crews loading fuel that never see anything else loaded in the airplanes. If anybody could prove any of those things, we'd have a place to start. But I really think that that conversation doesn't have as much to do with the idea of a sovereign, independent nation of Alberta, and it has more to do with talking about things and getting to the truth of the matter before we try and solve the problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a bit of a. It's like God grant me the serenity, right, to change the things I can, accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I think what Chris is saying is we've got to focus on the controllables, right, like ourselves. On the subject of AI, I just want to say this. It's important to remember AI is ultimately, it's a powerful technology, but it's just a technology, and it's a programmable technology. We could program an AI so that it respects our values. I'll give you an example. Those of you, remember Star Trek? What was the mission of the Starship Enterprise? To seek out new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. But they had, even with all technology, the 25th century technology, they had a prime directive. You remember this? Wherever they went, whatever civilization they went, and Captain Kirk used to sort of violate this with some of the green women he met, but they were not supposed to do any harm wherever they went. That was that was the prime directive: do no harm. And all of their computers on the ship were programmed to prevent them from doing that. But what's interesting about them, with all the technology that they had, the ability to visit all these different planets, if you watch that show, going and having contact with other people and other civilizations and not causing any harm was that was what the whole show was about, because that's really hard to do. So coming back to AI, imagine what if we programmed our AI to so that we couldn't do harm to each other. See, these guys want to use, as Chris said, they want to use AI, and this is what I was talking about tonight, they want to use it for evil purposes. Well, that's not new. The Nazis used technology in an evil way, but all this technology can also be used for good. So I don't think we should have an irrational fear about AI. I think the better questions we should ask is, how can we make the best use of this amazing, powerful technology? Because if we made good use of it, that could actually improve all of our lives. That could make life better. But these are choices that we have. The problem with AI, or the reason to be fearful and suspicious of it, is because they want to have exclusive control over it so they can control us. That's the problem with AI. It's not AI itself. We can do a lot of things, a lot of great things for humanity and for Alberta with AI. So I don't think we should have an irrational fear of technology, if that makes sense.
This isn't the first time either. You know, there's been other technological advancements that freaked people out, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. The printing press was one of them. That there was tons of fear around the printing press, specifically around, oh no, what if people start printing the Bible and they read it? That was a genuine fear. Internet, before that, radio, television, all of these things had things associated with it that could be used against us. Look at the damage the television has done. Look at the programming that's been done from the television and the radio before it. And then the internet. All of these things have inherent risks, and they've all enriched our lives in some way or another, and they all have caused damage in one way or another. And it's our job as responsible human beings to sift through that and find out where we can use these things to our advantage and limit the damage.
Hi, I have a couple of points. One of them is that the military. Sorry, that's very distracting, being so close to my face.
Hear you.
I know. But the military, if you're in the military, you cannot say anything against the military. It's like biting the hands that's feeding you. So there's laws against anybody in the military saying or doing anything against the military. And the military is never, ever supposed to be used for any defense against, or for any reason against our own citizens. Military is only to defend against other people that want to harm us. The other point that I was going to say just slipped my mind. But I guess the question I have is, have you been talking to people on the bases? Because the military can't, it's federal, so they can't say anything bad against the federal government, but everybody that lives in the provinces should be able to speak freely and vote freely about stuff like independence. So I don't know what kind of interactions you guys have been having with military, because the military people might be under the impression that they can't say anything about separation, because it might be viewed as against the federal government, right? And other point was for disasters. The military cannot be used for any disasters unless the provinces ask them in. So that was it.
I have not personally had many conversations with people in the military about Alberta independence. It's something that they will have to vote with their conscience. In terms of the military, you're right, strictly speaking. However, this is part of the problem that we have with our federal government, because they have exclusive control over the military, including the RCMP. They are using the RCMP and the military already in ways that are improper and illegal. We've seen some of the scandals that have happened within the RCMP, for example. The Emergency Powers Act actually gives the federal government the ability to call in the military whenever the government declares an emergency. And the courts have told the federal government that they can't do it. That's now before the Supreme Court of Canada. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Because if the Supreme Court overturns the decision in the lower courts, which found that the federal government broke the law in the way that they invoked the Emergency Powers Act and use it to suppress the Freedom Convoy, and that they violated the constitutional rights of the people who were involved. If the Supreme Court does that, it will only be able to do that based upon a totally politicized ideological viewpoint. And I predict that will be an international incident. Every country in the world is watching that. They're going to be watching that decision as closely as they watch the Freedom Convoy. And that is going to be a very, very important case in Canadian history. I think, in fact, if I was a betting man, I think there's at least a 50% chance that the Supreme Court simply won't hear it. They won't even grant leave. They'll just keep their hands off of it. Because, if, the only proper decision, and I've read the decision in the lower courts, the only proper decision that the Supreme Court could make is to uphold the decision in the lower courts. And as I say, if they don't do that, if they overturn it, it'll be obvious to everyone in the world, and it should be obvious to every Canadian, that the Supreme Court is completely politically controlled by the government of Canada right now.
So one quick point about military service people. They pay taxes, too much taxes. They feel underrepresented as Westerners as well. And the beautiful thing about voting is it's private. There's no boss there. There's no senior officer. Your spouse isn't there. It's you and democracy and a piece of paper and a pen. That's it. And then the choice is yours and yours only.
Hi, my name is Yvonne. First of all, thank you very much for coming to Riverhurst up in Cold Lake at the end of the road. Appreciate having you gentlemen here tonight. I have a question here first from someone who couldn't be in attendance. As the Supreme Court struggled to find the right course of action regarding property rights under the UNDRIP Act, signed under legislation that did not allow its citizens to know about, what can we do as homeowners to ensure our investment is secured as our investment and not having to pay more to Indigenous groups to keep it? Second part, and how can an independent Alberta, can we as a new nation ensure this type of scam doesn't happen again?
I'll answer the first question. If you're in Alberta, do what you can to advance Alberta's sovereignty. Let's talk Alberta. Absolutely. There are things we can do, and that is we got to talk about it. These are rational concerns that people have. Property is a big one right now. Alberta is different than BC because BC doesn't have affecting its land. We do, but I do believe that those who believe we're useless eaters will use whatever they can and whoever they can to accomplish their goals. So if it's not First Nations people, it's going to be something else.
Yeah, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a globalist Trojan horse. It's designed to destroy sovereignty over land and nationhood. And really, if you think about it, if you understand the concept of Aboriginal title, here's what it looks like. Aboriginal title is not like the title that you have to your house. Aboriginal title gives them all the rights of ownership, allegedly, except that they can only ever transfer the land to one party. Can you guess who that party is? Right. And if you go look at what the Indigenous groups in BC are doing right now, they've all signed on to the Silk Roads Initiative, which is being orchestrated by the Communist Party in China, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Did you know about the Silk Roads Initiative? Well, this is where they go around the world scarring the earth with lithium mines and offering lowballing African nations to extract all of their oil, because China has an Achilles heel. China is a huge nation with a massive population, with a lot of very intelligent, highly educated people, and they have a very ideologically driven government. And of course, they're a very powerful nation, but they have an Achilles heel. For some reason, God didn't grant China a lot of natural resources, especially energy. So they've got to go around the world and they've got to take that from other countries. And that's why they're infiltrating Canada. Canada is a huge ripe peach to the Chinese. And they're taking a huge bite out of it right now. And unfortunately, the unscrupulous people that we have in Ottawa are taking money from them, and they're handing over our government and our nation to them. And UNDRIP is one of the means by which they're they're doing this. And it's true that it's not in Alberta yet, but we shouldn't think that we're exempt from it. In Ontario, there's large tracts of land now that are under Aboriginal title claims, and half of the land in New Brunswick, in the province of New Brunswick, is being challenged by Aboriginal title. So to think that it's not going to be here, well, listen, if Mr. Nenshi ever forms a government in Alberta, we'll have an UNDRIP law. Canada is the only country that's been dumb enough or corrupt enough to make UNDRIP part of our law, and BC is the only province in Canada that has been foolish enough to make UNDRIP part of their law, and we see now the fruits of the poison tree.
I just thought of something. It might actually be closer than we think, Leighton, because as far as I know, there are actually some challenges from First Nations groups challenging the legitimacy of the treaties themselves. There's a concept of, and the Supreme Court, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, has actually ruled that oral contract carries equal weight as the written ones. So the claim is the oral conversation around the treaties between the signatories of said treaties included things that were never on them, therefore these treaties are illegitimate. Well, what does that say, right?
Well, and here's the worst part of it all. When did you ever vote for this? When were you ever asked about Aboriginal title? Most of the laws that we don't like that are shaping our lives are not being passed by our legislatures or the guys in Ottawa. It's coming out of our courts. The most powerful lawmaking body in Canada right now are our courts. And this happened. I was talking with a gentleman who's here, Mr. Buckle, about this, and he's quite right. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was a vehicle for this, to silently transfer power from the people, taking power away from our legislators, the people we elect, and handing it over to unelected judges. That's how we got Aboriginal title. That's how we got gay marriage. That's how we got the carbon tax. Okay? That's how we got DEI in our law. That's why we got the Lord's Day Act struck down. No parliament could do it. Court did it with a stroke of the pen. Can you believe that? 1985, Big M Drug Mart said that we couldn't have a national day called the Lord's Day Act when we would have stores closed so people could have a day of rest and worship, because, get this, that violated freedom of religion. Only a court, only a judge could come up with that type of rationale. But that's what we're living through right now. And these courts are not just interpreting the law the way they're supposed to. They're making law. That decision I told you about that is in the Supreme Court right now over the Freedom Convoy, that might be the most important judicial decision in the history of our country. Because if that court says, if it overturns that decision, it's basically saying that it's open season on Canadians. It basically says that a government in Canada can do anything it wants. It has a blank check, carte blanche, and the highest court in Canada will sign off on it, rubber stamp it. That's where we are.
Now, how do you convince an entire country to go along with these things? How do you convince an entire nation to basically serve their own heads up on a silver platter in this way? Well, you confuse them. What did the media do just before UNDRIP was brought in? Do you remember? What was the claim? What did we see on the news right during the Open for Summer, Open for Good campaign that broke everybody's hearts and caused everybody to wear orange and put shoes? The 215 hoax. And it is a hoax. The 215 hoax. The claim was there was 215 murdered Indigenous children buried at a residential school in Kamloops. The media printed it. The lie was repeated again and again and again. The Pope said that the church had committed genocide against Indigenous people. Our Prime Minister stood in front of the UN and apologized with tears streaming down his face for the cultural genocide committed in Canada against Indigenous people. And it pulled on people's heartstrings. It confused them, by the way, because they didn't actually know the facts. They didn't know the whole story. They knew what they read on the headlines or on Facebook. And it created an emotional barrier in them that prevented them from thinking critically about what they were being told. And it allowed our government to bring in this legislation that literally threatens your sovereignty over your home. And we asked for it. Isn't that amazing? I've said this once, I'll say it again. If you're confused, you lose. And that's why Let's Talk Alberta exists, because there's a lot of confusion about a lot of things, and we need to talk about these things and cut down to the core of it, find out what's real and focus on it and fix it.
Two questions. October 20th, on a yes referendum, what does it look like? On October 20th, on a no referendum, what does it look like? Where to next from there? I'd like to get your opinions.
So October 20th after a yes, I assume there's going to be quite the celebration, and then we're going to get to work, because that's when the real work starts. Like, we're talking about building a new nation, and that is not an easy task. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be, after the negotiations and we become independent, it will probably be a little bit chaotic for the first little bit. That is a given. But we're ready to do the work, right? Right? So we don't stop. If it's a no, same thing. We probably have a little celebration because we got to participate in direct democracy. That's a win. Then what do? We get to work and we continue going. We exercise the serenity prayer. You know, we do what we can, and we ask for wisdom to know the difference between what we can and can't do, and we just keep moving forward.
I think this is a really, really good question. Here's the thing. I don't think that Alberta independence turns on the referendum result. I think it's there's something deeper there. But the real answer to your question, Bob, is, in terms of what happens the day after, is what kind of leadership do we have? And this is an open question. I'm not saying anything about, Mitch Sylvester or Jeff Rath or any of those people. But I think that one of the things that needs to happen between now and October is, I think that Albertans need to decide who are going to be the leaders going forward. Whether it's a yes or a no, where is that leadership group going to be? Who are those people going to be who are going to enter into negotiation with Ottawa? If under the terms of the Clarity Act, if it's a yes, who are the people who are going to lead us in the event that it's a no vote and we've got to regroup and rethink and retool? And there's a bit of a, in my opinion, there's a bit of a leadership gap. And I'm not saying anything against people who have done, but listen, they've done a tremendous job of organizing people at the grassroots level and getting signatures. But that's not the kind of political leadership that it's going to take to get this football over the goal line. And so I think what I'd like to see over the next few months is I think we need to have kind of a leadership convention, get a group of candidates together, people coming forward, and let Albertans decide who that leadership team is going to be. Because this idea of top-down leadership is what we all want to get away from. It's a grassroots movement, and the grassroots should decide who that leadership is going to be. And I think that's the maybe deeper answer to your question, Bob.
Just 1 second. Leighton, you mentioned our mutual friend, Jeff Rath. You remember that time that you and Jeff kind of tag teamed the Alberta government and cross-examined Dina Hinshaw and had the court declare that the COVID mandates were all illegal? That was funny.
Yeah, that was fun. And then she got fired. And then they changed the law. That was cool too. They changed the law so they couldn't do that to us anymore. Those are fun days.
Brad, there's one up front here.
Well, we're just going to give you a microphone because people on the stream cannot hear you even though you're 50 feet away.
This is my question. I do believe that we're going to need to have a private internet to be able to go forward anyways. So I'm wondering if we could train AI to, as before we become an independent Alberta, to build our own private internet or app to protect us to be able to build a healthy, new, free Alberta, an AI privacy app.
That's a great idea, and that's an application of what I was saying. You know, it's important to understand what AI is and it is not. It's not really intelligence. That's a pretentious name for it. You know, Aquinas said that intelligence is the marriage of reason and spirit. Well, if you think of AI, AI really can't reason. Really, what it is it's the greatest plagiarism project ever. All it does is it steals everybody else's words and ideas. It's a large language model, but it doesn't have it doesn't have a soul, so it's not inspired. So it's not really intelligence. The beautiful thing about AI is that, as you said, it's programmable, at least for now. There's talk of a general intelligence AI that is sentient and free thinking. But I think if that ever came about, there's no question it would be metaphysically evil. It would have to be metaphysically evil because it would have no soul, right? It would have no connection to the divine. So that's really dangerous. So this is why I think you're right. We have to be proactive about how are we going to use AI, right? For example, I mean, think of another technological advance that threatens civilization, you know, the nuclear warheads, bombs. Well, you know, we haven't had one of these dropped on human population since 1945. That's over 80 years, and we put controls on these things. AI is a tool. Nuclear energy is a very useful tool. In fact, it's the closest thing to clean energy we have. We have a lot of ability to develop it in Western Canada, especially in Alberta and Saskatchewan, because we have high concentrations of uranium. That's something that I would like to see an independent Alberta develop that. Listen, we've got all the oil and gas. I think we're the third largest reserves in the world. What if we developed our nuclear capability? Wow. Well, what could that mean to our energy? And not only our wealth, what could that mean to our defense, right? Because we know. I'm afraid that's a fallacy.
Please get to the question.
There's no,
We need to use the proper format because the folks listening can't hear anything that's being said unless we're using the microphone.
Okay, so we all know history repeats itself quite often.
It rhymes.
So one of the things that I've done, and it helps me talk to people who are opposed to this idea, was, and if you're going to build a big project or you have a court case, you build a timeline. I started my timeline at about 1870. There's the RCMP. We had mass immigration. We've actually had mass immigration into Alberta 4 times. The third one, which was the DPs, the ones that came from Germany and what have you, one of them got taken into the House of Commons and got honored. He was a Nazi. So we didn't vet these guys correctly. But the ones out of the 1920s and the 1930s, they came to Canada because Stalin was starving them out. So that part of it worked. But if you build a timeline, and mine, I think, is over 100 different points right now and expanding. I learned something today from the National Citizens Inquiry. There has been one farmer's inquiry just in March over in Kamloops. There is another one going to go on in Ontario in July 8th to 11th, I think, are the dates. Pay attention to these things. That is a really good source, that National Citizens Inquiry. There was over 150 subject matter experts testified before. You can take their information and put it into your timeline, how it has affected us. They talk about money. Oh, Alberta won't know how to print money. We had money, 1936 to 1938. It was called funny money. At the end of every month, you had to go somewhere, and I think it was the Treasury branch, to put a 1-cent stamp on your dollar. It was the way the provincial government paid its people. And it got money circulating. According to my father, who was 21 years old in 1936, he said it made money move. Otherwise, people were just hoarding it and would never spend it because they couldn't re-earn it. There is lots of different things that if you put together a timeline, you will see patterns, and we can answer other people's questions. They'll come back and say, hey, well, how did we do this? Well, there's the answer. We already did it once. We did it 4 times. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But build a timeline. It'll answer your own questions. It'll also reinforce different things that the government has screwed us over on or did well. Thank you.
Okay, this was to do with, I think it was you that touched on it, Chris Scott, maybe it was Mr. Grey. Clarity Act. Don't we just love that word from the feds? Because if they enforce that, what's going to happen then? Because that Clarity Act, I think it was you, Chris, you never expanded on it now that I think about it.
What is it that you would like to know?
Well, you cut it short about we're moving forward, we've got all this happening, which is great, but all of a sudden there's the Clarity Act word mentioned in, I think it was 1992-ish.
It was 2000.
Okay, because it happened to be where Quebec, went through its thing. Now, the Clarity Act had something to do with all of a sudden your provinces, if you did decide to do this, leave Canada, there was some stipulations there.
Well, so I'll clear that up. The Clarity Act was a response to the 95 referendum that Quebec held. And
Yes,
the question was, there was a reference question went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the question was, can a province unilaterally secede? And the Supreme Court went and they reviewed all their things, they did their legal magic, and they came back and they said, no, a province can't unilaterally secede. However, if there's a clear question with a clear answer, hence the Clarity Act, then that would trigger negotiations between the province and the federal government, which may result in secession. That's as far as the Clarity Act goes, and there's a reason for that. Because after that, we're no longer within Canadian constitutional framework. We're outside of that. We're doing something different, because when a province is saying they want to secede, they're saying we repudiate the Constitution and we want to do it ourselves. We no longer consent to being governed under that. We want to do it ourselves. That's why it ended there. There's a misconception that a constitutional amendment would have to occur for Alberta to leave. That is incorrect. When Alberta leaves, Canada will need to make a constitutional amendment because obviously what's referring to Alberta no longer makes any sense. But when we're talking about independence, we're removing ourselves from being governed by that document, and we're saying we're going to do it on our own. In this case, we move into the international stage. And international law says that for a region to become sovereign or independent, become a state, a nation, they need 2 things. The will of the people, and in our case, the will of the people is shown through a successful referendum on Alberta sovereignty, and international recognition of that group. That is it. 2 countries, 3 countries, whatever. I mean, if it was just the United States, that would probably suffice, but that's irrelevant. There's only those 2 things needed, recognition and the will of the people. So yeah, the Clarity Act is our legal pathway, but it is certainly not the be-all, end-all of independence.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
My question has to do with foreign ownership. Would we be in position to limit it, stop it, or control it once Alberta successfully becomes its own country? For example, I read somewhere that China has about 1/3 of Alberta's gas and oil.
Yes. Yes, we would be in a position to do that, 100%. And it would be our opportunity as Albertans, for the first time in our history, to decide what that looks like. Actually, it wouldn't be the first time in history. I think provinces can do that now. Saskatchewan never used to allow foreign ownership of their farmland. And back in 1997, when I graduated, I moved to Frontier, Saskatchewan, and lived on my best friend's farm that he paid $2,000 for, 12 acres in 1996. After Saskatchewan repealed that legislation and allowed foreign ownership, pension funds bought up everything, land prices skyrocketed, and it was absolute chaos that it is now. But yes, we would be in a position to do that.
Another one is I had heard that the big 5, the China, Russia, France, England, and the United States, would be the ones who have to accept sovereign Alberta because they seem to control a lot of stuff, even with Yugoslavia and what happened with some of the other countries. Have you heard about that, or is that a factual or a fallacy?
They certainly do have a lot of sway in the international community. But really, I'll give you an example, a concrete example. When Kosovo declared independence, going back about 20 years, Canada was actually the first nation to recognize them internationally, their Declaration of Independence. And so why couldn't Alberta issue a Declaration of Independence? And if we did, isn't it obvious that the Americans would recognize us? I mean, Mr. Trump has effectively said so publicly many times. So was Mr. Rubio. I think that effectively the only country that we would need to recognize Alberta independence internationally is the United States, effectively. And I think what we've seen, I don't know, there was this picture, I think it was in January of this year, I don't know if you saw this, of Mr. Trump in his office, and he had all the leaders of those countries you described all around his desk. I think that's what it would look like.
Well, folks, it's getting kind of late, and I'm sure everyone's turning into a pumpkin like I am. So I think we're going to wrap it up. If you have other questions, we'll be around for a few more minutes. You can approach us individually. Other than that, you can find us on the, as my friend Ben calls it, the inner tube, the interwebs at letstalkalberta.com. You can find this live stream on freedomcalendar.net or on the Whistle Stop Facebook page or on just about all of the other social media platforms. Please share it with your friends. Be willing to have these conversations and continue coming to these events. Bring more questions, and please bring people who are on the fence. That's what we really need. We really need that duplication to make this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for tuning in. We're about to end the stream. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. we have just give me the mic. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. we have an interview with Nat and the guy at 7 p.m. tomorrow, and also at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, I have no other than John Bolton on my show, but 5 p.m. on Wednesday. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you in a bit. And just follow my socials for the next events as well. Don't forget the super chats and the e-transfers helps the show keeping going, pays the bills, and thanks for your time. Bye for now.